Good afternoon, everybody. Bob Brisky here with Pinnacle Financial Services. I'd like to take a second to thank everybody for joining us on our webinar conference call here today. Couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. We do have quite a fair-sized audience on the call today, so all of the phones are on mute. But there is a question section in your go to webinar portal there. That if you do have some questions, feel free, type in some information. Be glad to get to those questions. Either myself or our presenter today. We're very excited. Those of you know John Greene. John, if you attended our summit this year, which we got our summit in right under the wire before COVID started really hitting and the shutdown started right in that first week of March. And John presented at our summit this year, and we had a great response to it. And we asked John to come back out here today and do a follow-up before AEP started on really the state of Medicare. Updates on everything COVID, what's being talked about on the Hill as far as regulations, a lot of changes in Medicare.gov. Of course, we know last year Medicare.gov made some considerable and I would say negative changes to their platform, which really didn't go very well, which, that's certainly something to look at coming up here this year. So John, as the VP of Congressional Affairs over at NAHU, is really day-to-day over there in Washington. I guess more over the phone here, John, than in person these days, but really just at the forefront of what's going on and how the changes that are being laid out there by Congress will really impact not only our clients, but also us and our businesses. So, John, we really appreciate you taking a little bit of time here today to give us a sort of the state of the Medicare world here this afternoon. So if you're ready to go, please, let's get started.
All right. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be on. I just want to preface this by saying that this is our federal update. It contains a lot of information on a lot of issues besides Medicare. I'll gloss over things that, group market and so forth. But I think it's valuable to get a context of what's happening in Washington and sort of the tone other than what you see on television. So let's go into the COVID response. Everything has been COVID related, including discussions on the next phase that is under discussion. In my conversation with Leader McConnell, he said that if it's not COVID related, it won't be in this package. All the early bills were focused on providers getting assistance out to hospitals for PPE equipment and so forth. Then the second one was around paid leave, testing, food assistance, unemployment, and so on. And we've had a couple of other bills since then. Everything up to this point, through these bills that you see here on the screen, were very bipartisan. And while it was a top-down process worked out by leadership in the Senate, in the House, and the White House, it moved very quickly. I won't go into all of the bills here, but other than to say that relative to the HEROES Act, this is important in the discussions today because that is the House position. They threw everything in, including the kitchen sink in this, but there are a lot of good elements in here, including premium assistance for COBRA, to keep people on private coverage. Also, some FSA language that we support. And in fact, the latest proposal even includes dependent care FSA amounts, which don't carry over and it is important for families who planned for childcare but never got to use the benefit. They made those decisions before the pandemic. So everyone knows that we need additional assistance to people. I'm going to put out here some bubbles of kind of where each of the stakeholders are coming from. They all have very different positions. They are changing daily. In fact, I heard today that President Trump had said liability protections was not important. And I think that if you talk to most companies, this is foremost in their mind as they bring people back to work. But there are areas of agreement. And so in this Venn diagram, you kind of see where the various stakeholders have agreement. There needs to be technical changes. There's still some PPP issues relative to whether to what IRS recently put out that conflicts with what is in the legislative language. You see infrastructure in here that it will not be in the bill because it's not COVID related. It's hard to make that leap. One thing that all stakeholders have learned that if you want a provision in the bill, it's got to be COVID related. Liability protections, of course, is foremost in Senate Republicans' minds. SNAP and FMAP expansion of public programs is in the Democratic wish list, but we're far apart from any agreement on anything at the moment, in part because Senate Republicans and the White House can't agree on what should be in the package. There have been a lot of regulatory responses, particularly in the Medicare space, as you know, relative to the 3-day stay requirement. You know, we've been working on this observation issue for some time, and suddenly by stroke of a pen, they seem to have found a way to waive the 3-day stay requirement and relax that. They've done a great deal in the area of telehealth, and we expect many of those provisions will continue on through 2021. This is on the Department of Labor. They've also been providing a lot of flexibility relative to unemployment benefits, particularly about having to, look for work and report that and so forth. Here's where I mentioned about telehealth. This has been on the docket for over a decade. I think I've been working on this for 12 years or so. And I think that a lot of this now is going to be here to stay. And so it's a question of how much of it stays. Do they take the bull by the horns and really, for all time, make it a lot of these flexibilities allowable, or do they continue to study it? And that's sort of in the place that they're at right now. So the CMS announced flexibility around the SEP in that essentially if a beneficiary had an SEP eligibility event, so to speak, and they were not able to take advantage of it due to COVID, there is an allowance for an SEP for A, B, C, and D. But note that the dates for them are different. They don't apply the same depending on what part of Medicare you're talking about. On our website on NAHU.org and the Medicare portal, we specifically outline what those flexibilities are. I've been working closely with CMS on that, and I got some advance notice of it, and we actually shot it out to all our members in advance of when it came out. There's a toolkit that they offer. Many of you probably already know about it, but if you don't, these slides will be made available to you, and you can, so you don't have to try to jot this down or screenshot it. You'll get these slides. I'm going to go through skip some of these things. Just to suffice it to say that we've submitted a ton of suggestions to the administration on various flexibilities that we've been asking for. Some of them have already been taken care of. Most of these have to do with group market issues here. So I'll go quickly through that. Now, let's just talk for a moment, and since we're still on the COVID piece and the AEP coming up, we are going to be submitting today a number of suggestions to HHS and CMS on enrollment flexibilities under COVID, due to COVID, that we think they ought to consider. And they include things like telephonic discussions, since we know that you're not going to be able to have face-to-face with beneficiaries. Many of our agents tend to be older, and many of them are beneficiaries themselves, and they no more want to be face-to-face with their clients than the client wants to be face-to-face either. But in order to reach some of the underserved areas, we think that a telephonic option, even with text messaging capabilities, is a way to go. And I know that a few carriers have already responded and said that they are developing platforms in this way. But we're asking CMS specifically to direct all carriers to have at least one alternative to face-to-face to facilitate enrollment. We've also asked them to put aside the scope of appointment requirements. They just are another irritant that gets in the way of getting enrollments done this year. In terms of the Medicare Plan Finder that Bob mentioned, what rollout was so rocky last year, we've been working with them on a number of changes for this year. Some of them are substantial, some of them are more cosmetic. They still are having print issues. They still cannot save a drug list, cannot do an anonymous search. But they have promised for next year at this time that we will have those things. And so we'll be working with them as they go through that process. So just kind of the political outlook. We know that Senator Biden, or Vice President Biden, is going to be the nominee, and we expect him to choose his VP next week. That's what he has announced he will do. My money is on Susan Rice. He has a very strong relationship with her, worked with her when he was vice president, and she kind of fits, I think, the profile that he's seeking. And here is the potential list, working list that he's been pulling from. I think Kamala Harris had been sort of the front leader, but the civil unrest and the fact that she was a district attorney, or a district attorney and an attorney general of California, just is, and she didn't perform particularly well. I think she got kind of torn up during the debates. Stacey Abrams doesn't have the experience. Elizabeth Warren is, I think he prefers a person of color. Gretchen has, some cred, but as a governor, but with COVID, she's on TV every day in the state. I have not heard of Val Demings, but she's on this list apparently. And so there's a Republican side here. This is just to point out the timeline from beginning to through August, the conventions, which now will be virtual and scale back. It'll be interesting to see what happens in 2024 if we snap back to conventional, role for the convention, or if it just becomes an artifact that is not as important optically as it has been in the past. Just quickly scrolling through this here. So the platforms, it's interesting that Vice President Biden has actually slipped more and more to the left. He had been moving more to the center, but he's been saying more about expanding government healthcare programs, allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices, which actually, the President Trump has an element of that in his platform. He would prohibit surprise billing, though I don't know any details on that. And he would double down on investment in community health centers. But it is his position on Medicare for all and various iterations for buy-in options in Medicare or Medicaid that are concerning. President Trump would probably continue efforts to limit the Affordable Care Act, though I believe that it is here to stay, but could it use market improvements? Yeah, certainly, it really could. He has been proceeding with drug pricing rulemaking or through an executive order. I honestly think that is dead still. I just don't think that that's going to move forward this year. And he would combat surprise billing by just saying the consumer is not responsible. We'll let payers and the carriers duke it out with the providers in court, which is, I think, a bad use of court time. This is just a look at the map here about how things are split. You can see that the Democrats obviously control, though when you look at the map, you wouldn't know that, but that's where the population centers are. House projections at this moment are that they should maintain control of the House. Though, I'm hearing that a lot of people are gun shy to say that they, in polling, when asked if they support the president, to admit that. There was an element of that in 2016. But, it's really a lifetime between now and the election, even though it's a little over 90 days. There are a third of the Senate seats up for grabs. I think, I'm going to go forward here just to kind of go through this list just very quickly. A number of these vacancies are Republican. They are, some are due to redistricting has played a part. Some are seeking higher office. But when you have more vacancies on one side than you do the other, the number of seats to defend or to keep are more difficult. And so that makes it a harder climb. but there's some really good quality candidates, and all politics is local. And I think a lot of them will run based on those local issues in their state. In terms of the most vulnerable, Doug Jones kind of took a seat that really will probably end up in the Republican column. Cory Gardner's in a tough fight in Colorado, I think largely because registrations are so lopsided towards Democrats now. Martha McSally is slightly behind in Arizona. Tillis, the same. Susan Collins, she's the only one that's been above water in terms of the polls, only ever so slightly. But I think that in Maine, unhappiness with the president is just tilting it the other way, and has down ballot effects. Gary Peters in Michigan, nobody knows who this guy is, that he's even their senator in Michigan. He can walk through the airport and just not be known, which makes why he's on this list. Joni Ernst, I think, will be fine in Iowa. David Perdue has a tougher race there, in part because there's some of the same effects that are occurring in Georgia that I mentioned in Colorado with respect to registrations. Shaheen, I think, will be fine on the Democratic side in New Hampshire, and Cornyn also will be fine. I think it's because Ted Cruz had some difficulty in his race, but he picked up on that early and took measures to guard against that. So that's sort of the political outlook. In terms of priorities, we got rid of the premium tax, which I know is important to Medicare agents in terms of the impact it has on premium effects, though it won't really show until next year because of the lateness of the passage of the repeal. They couldn't make the effective date in time, but for starting in 2021, that is gone forever. We worked on that for 2 years as part of a coalition, and we're very pleased. This is the high water mark, 2019. It seems like forever ago, doesn't it? I'm just gonna say about this that we're still very defensive about the employer exclusion. This is something that our agents hate, is the reporting. In terms of market stability, I'll just say, some of you work in the individual market. I'll just say that we've always supported reinsurance pool ideas because they actually lower premium by as much as 20%. So a lot of states are looking to adopt some form of reinsurance to stabilize their market. We have legislation in the Congress, in the House, and we have Senate supporters, champions in the Senate to treat COBRA as credible coverage. Now, I know there are a lot of issues relative to Part B besides this, but the penalty, the 10% penalty that they've been actually collecting, has been a real sore point. And we were trying to tuck this issue into the cures, into the Bennies Act, recently in the Energy and Commerce Committee. And some stakeholders that we've been working with, the Medicare Rights Center in particular, decided that maybe they should be amended and do some more things besides just eliminate the penalty and treat it as credible coverage. And so they sort of upended our effort there. But Kurt Schrader, who has been a champion on this for 20 plus years, got an agreement from the chairman and from Greg Walden, the ranking Republican, to bring this up in September as a standalone. But now our play is really in the Senate. Maybe we can get it attached in the Senate to the Bennies Act there, or they're going to have to deal with this credible coverage issue, because if they pass a premium assistance for COBRA in the group market, this issue could be a real problem for people who might take it and then miss the window. And so we're still trying to thread this needle here. The other option is just to say that if you are Medicare eligible, you won't qualify for a COBRA subsidy. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are on that. Observation status, of course, very expensive to repeal, as I mentioned in my talk before. But again, interesting that they could, waive the 3-day stay with the stroke of a pen. I still think that this is an issue that could be dealt with this year if they wanted to. They're passing bills in the trillions of dollars. And even though this is expensive, what's a few more million? Allowing seniors to contribute to their HSAs if they're still attached to the workforce makes ultimate sense, right? Otherwise, it's age discrimination to say that just because you're turning 65, you can't contribute at the moment that you need the benefit or the funds the most. It's just so wrong-headed. And so there is bipartisan legislation to allow that. So this issue of balanced billing, I don't know that this is so much a Medicare issue, but boy, is it a hot issue here. Though I think that it won't be in the next bill, because, as I said, that Leader McConnell doesn't believe that this is COVID related, though. We're asking NAHU group market people to get us stories as to whether this is showing up or not. We, of course, would prefer free market commercial rates or something tied to Medicare. The providers want arbitration, and we just think that that uncertainty just drives up premiums. There's been, as I said, a lot of activity on that issue. I mentioned prescription drugs earlier. There's been a lot of activity on it this Congress, but I just don't see it going anywhere. It's a very difficult issue with some very big guns in Washington, from pharma to the PBMs and a number of stakeholders in between. That I don't think that this gets done this year. Single payers, always a concern of ours, particularly if we don't do a subsidy for people for COBRA to keep them tied to their employer. If we just do a public program expansion, it's just really feeding the frenzy for Medicare for all. I think that, healthcare is always high on voters' lists, but I'm hearing in particular that, suburban moms who really care about healthcare, this is the fear of losing coverage due to the pandemic is very much on their minds. Many of you have seen this slide. I think I showed this maybe once before about what it would cost to do this. Public options are what really worry me, because it sounds good, it seems easy, and it's an option, right? You're not being required to join a public option, but it's out there if you want it. And that's what concerns me, is that we still can't compete with the federal government. And once we start separating the market this way, it just becomes an irresistible force. Of course, you know about the Medicare for All bill that Bernie Sanders pushed and their companion bill in the House. It would do away with Med Sups, Medicare Advantage, and private coverage of any kind. The CBO has repeatedly asserted that it could affect costs and quality. A number of great institutions in many states would disappear, and states are very proud of some of the institutions that they have in their states, and the thought of losing them due to lower reimbursement that single payer would entail still makes this a non-starter. But I'm going to skip ahead just for a sec because of my train of thought here. But states are the place where, as state legislatures have become more democratic in recent years, there's more efforts to try to institute some sort of single payer. Now, of course, COVID has caused state coffers to dry up, and there's no money to do so. So they are withdrawing their support for these proposals, but it's still worth noting that that they are kind of thinking that way. And then here are a number of buy-in options. There are several iterations of this. Medicare for More to allow 50 to 64-year-olds to buy into current Medicare coverage. Medicare X for a public option plan parallel to Medicare coverage. Medicare E, which follows the alphabet soup that we already have in our system, allowing people with private employer plans to buy Medicare. This one I particularly dislike. And then a Medicaid buy-in for all residents. I'm just going to skip that because, as I said, states are sort of pulling out of this business because of what because of the pandemic. So this prescription drug initiative that I mentioned, has really just fallen flat. Though he did win in court around some advertising things, but they invited pharma in, and in his executive order, they stood to actually reap a lot of benefits in terms of the way it was going to work. And I think, Medicare beneficiaries would have been helped in some respect, but the premium impacts would have been really significant, probably around 20%. And I just don't see doing that in an election year. I think that's rather foolish. Of course, he likes this international pricing index model. I kind of get it. I just don't think that it is ripe for discussion right now with all that is going on. He's put out an executive order to increase healthcare price transparency and quality transparency. Of course, the hospitals hate it, but we'll see. I think transparency can be a good thing up to a point. There's some importation language in the executive order that would allow people to import for their own purposes. But, it's always been an issue about safety, right? If you go into a brick and mortar facility in Canada, you're getting the real deal. But just because it has a Canadian flag on a website, could be from India or China, no telling. This has always been very contentious. Of course, we weighed in on the prescription drug proposal that they had that was pulled. We had a number of objections to it. In particular, the timeline was overly ambitious. I mentioned the hospital transparency final rule. So where we disagree on the transparency is relative to this bullet here about mandatory disclosures of all charges. There are some things that need to be kept, under wraps, I think, just for business purposes. I'm trying to look for some more Medicare issues here. This Texas versus the United States just has to do with overturning the ACA. Again, the timelines are really long. The court processes are just incredibly slow. There have been legal challenges to association health plans, short-term limited duration plans as well. We rather liked short-term limited duration plans because they have a place in the market, though we do question the amount of months in the flexibility. First, we did with the Obama administration that they were too short, and now with the Trump administration that they're too long. The carriers won a significant battle in court over unpaid ACA funds. It's really indirectly our issue. Okay, so we use a tool called Operation Shout. So, for example, when I mentioned the COBRA's credible coverage, we ask our members to weigh in with their legislators to support or not support something else with their legislators, and their clients can do the same, and you can personalize it. We are known for our grassroots capability. We, as mentioned, submit comments on all sorts of federal regulations. Every time the CMS puts out a regulation on Medicare, we're responding to it. By the way, the Medicare and You handbook comes out each year, and I don't know if you know, but NAHU has been commenting on the handbook for almost 20 years. Our Medicare advisory group and now our FMO council each year weighs in on the handbook. In particular, I'll highlight for you that we've asked specifically wherever they mention ships, that they mention agents and brokers. I think that the guidance and support that you give your clients is far greater than ships counselors. Their knowledge of Medigap is and the plans, they just don't have the complete package, is what I'm trying to say. A lot of them are volunteers. They're rather niche. They're not licensed. They're not appointed. This is a really big issue, and I followed up with CMS to ask them, what are you doing about our request to include agents and brokers in the language, specifically in the handbook? Of course, we commented heavily on COBRA. There's a lot of gaps in the way that they describe that transition from work to Medicare. We have a trifold brochure that you can request order from NAHU. Let's see if I have a picture of it here somewhere. Okay. This is the Operation Shout. This is what it actually looks like. I was looking, no, I don't see it. We have a brochure for Medicare, and we revise it every couple of years to make sure it stays up to date. But basically what it says is, a brief description about Medicare, it's easy to see that it's more complex than they perhaps thought, and that they ought to look for a licensed agent in this respect. We do have a PAC, and this really helps me build relationships with members of Congress and advance our issues with them. It's been very helpful in getting legislation introduced and passed. It's part of that three-legged stool. All our sister agents groups do this too. NAHU does it, Big I, and CIAB all have PACs, and you're really measured in Washington by the size of your PAC. We have a very strong media presence. We're really good at getting op-eds placed. You can't do anything in Washington without a coalition, and we've belonged to a number of coalitions in the Stop the Hit, as I mentioned, relative to the premium tax. The Fight to 40 was the caddy tax. And we're in one now on the COBRA issue. So I'd really like to hear from you guys. Do we have some questions, Bob?
Hey, John, let me just check here and see the questions section in there. If you do have any, please feel free to type those in. John, right this second, I don't see any questions put in there. So I'll give everybody another second here to see if anybody wants to add anything during the call here.
Do you have one that you want to kick off with?
Yeah, I think one of the things we and it's always interesting getting a little bit of the behind the scenes look at how things work there. But one of the things that I don't think everybody always understands is how NAHU is working on is working really daily for insurance professionals. That issues such as commissions, which I think a lot of agents just take for granted. I don't know if you want to touch base on that conversation, but how really NAHU really stepped up and made a concerted effort so that the powers that be really understood the level of complexity and what an insurance professional does at point of sale, and why it was so integral. So I don't know if you want to touch base on that a little bit from what was it last year?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I worked on the MMA that established the drug benefit in Medicare. It was one of my proudest accomplishments as a lobbyist for NAHU. And Janet Twatwine, our CEO, worked on it as well. And she actually, we both went to the bill signing for that. One of the questions we asked was, would CMS be a good business partner? Right, because we're introducing private plans into a public program, which is oil and vinegar. And over time, there were, as things happen in the marketplace, CMS likes to build a better mousetrap. We got the scope of appointment because of the fact that during the ramp up for the rollout of the MA plans was so intense that they weren't appointing agents, and there were some things that happened in the market. I've gotten them to scale that back. When they look at commission structures, which we always feel it should be between the plan and the agent, they've looked to reduce commissions. We've got them to pull back from that. Recently, 2 years ago, they wanted to do away with overrides for FMOs. They thought it was another commission on top of a commission. They didn't understand the purpose of the overrides and the back office support that you provide agents and the training and so forth. And that came very close to happening. I was able to make a call to an old friend who happens to be in the secretary's office and explained it to her and got them to withdraw that from the regulation. So sometimes what happens in Washington is things that you don't see. It's not, it's a phone call, it's quiet diplomacy behind closed doors or through, emails or phone conversations. It's not always, repealing a bill, something in a bill or getting legislation passed, but it's these other mechanisms relative to our relationship with CMS. It's pretty good. It's far better than it's ever been. I have enough connections there to be able to ask for things and ask for inside information about things that are emerging issues, or be proactive and ask for something specific, or even to handle prickly issues that agents have had with clients. I've been able to feed those to them and get some assistance in resolving those cases. Have we gotten anything in the box yet?
I do have a couple that questions that have popped up here. The first one, pretty straightforward, wants to do with any expansion with dental coverage with respect to Medicare. With Medicare Advantage, obviously they're sort of tied to the plan, but what about with Medicare in general?
There have been efforts in the past to add major benefits like hearing aids or dental, but keep in mind that the trust fund is going broke, and adding a benefit such as that would be extremely expensive. Though, I agree that there's a need there. But here's what I think is going to happen. I think that in after this presidential election, in the next Congress, Medicare is going to be more front and center because they're going to have to address some things relative to the solvency of Medicare. And so there may be a rearrangement of the way that Part A and Part B work, and cost sharing, I think, could be affected, and benefits certainly will be under discussion. I mentioned the problems with Part B. That is ripe for looking at. Who pays first? The secondary payer rules are just a nightmare, and other things relative to moving from employer coverage to Medicare, as I said, are awkward at best, right? Because people don't retire now at 65 and ride off into the sunset and get the gold watch. They're working longer because they have to. People are healthier today, and so working till 70 is, there could be an age adjustment made for eligibility in the program. I could see that.
Yeah, no, great points on that there. I'm going to paraphrase. I got a couple of questions here that are a little lengthy here, so I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. With regards to, you mentioned Bernie Sanders with Medicare for All and Biden sort of gravitating on healthcare to the left. What would the impact be on insurance agents if Medicare for All ends up going through and you have the loss of advantage and supplements, as you had mentioned? Has there been a conversation as to the overall business model that many of the agents are using today, and what would happen.
Well, agents would go away under that scenario. They don't contemplate any type of private insurance of any kind. So it would be fully funded through taxes and perhaps assessments. I think there would be for employers a maintenance of effort requirement so that they're still kicking in dollars into the system. But the model that we operate under today would disappear.
Right. Yeah. Huge impact, obviously. There's a question here. I'm going to read it sort of the way it was written here, and it might be you'll understand it a little better than I do. It has to do with pricing on medical billing and overall transparency, where if somebody's paying for something, cash prices versus network prices versus what Medicare is paying for something. Is there a drive to have overall more transparency so that I guess there's more uniformity?
So the cost of care varies from place to place. New York is going to be more expensive than Oklahoma. And so CMS has broken the country up into various geographical regions to account for price differentiations in geographic different locations. I think that, if you still want access to some of the best hospitals in the country, you're going to have to pay more for access to them. But I kind of see what they're getting at. I remember in the mid 2000s, in the Medicare group, we had a big discussion about, well, can't we just have a blanket, cost structure payment system across the country? And I think there'd be a lot of pushback on that, and we'd have to be careful about making sure that we still have access. I think it's fair to know what things cost up to a point, but I don't think we need to get into contractual transparency about carrier versus and those kind of negotiations with hospitals. I think that's going too far.
No, makes sense there. This is, I think, less of a question, more of a comment. We had mentioned about Medicare for All and the concerned overall business model. And great point here that I think we're going to need organizations like NAHU, and the mention here, shout out to you, John, more than ever to sort of have that voice there on Capitol Hill for us all. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned to everybody on the call here today, that Pinnacle Financial Services, we partner extremely heavily with the NAHU organization. There are state-run offices that each and every agent should be participating in now more than ever. There's so much going on in the political landscape, and I'm sure, John, you would agree. I mean, this year has just been off the charts, and I think we're getting more and more, to that point where the two sides are just so far apart, and depending on who's in power, things are going to change rapidly. We have on our website, and I can direct everybody to that, a registration link for NAHU if you're not familiar how to get signed up. I will send that out to everybody that's on the call here today, and we'll be glad to, have our team walk you through how to participate in that. But John, I don't know if you want to touch on how much of an impact, participating in those state, NAHU organizations, and how important that is for us to really have a big voice on these issues.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. It is important, and that there's strength in numbers. We're stronger together. Advocacy isn't free. It costs money to be able to hire lobbyists to go advocate for you, not only with Congress, but with the federal agencies. It used to be you could be an independent agent. And look, you guys are all business people who, you know, are self starters who work the business, but the business has changed. I mean, in some ways, it's still 1965, right? The landscape is changing rapidly, as you said. You can't keep up with it, and I think that's why FMOs play such an important role now in providing that backroom support and education and training, because things are changing almost daily. And with the pandemic, it's just been crazy, the amount of change that has occurred and will continue to occur. And you just can't keep up with it all. And so, you know, don't be a free rider. It's not. You guys are professionals, and you should belong to a professional organization like NAHU. We are the only agent group that's focused, as we are, on Medicare. Always have been. When Janet hired me 20 years ago, the first thing she brought up was Medicare. She said, "I want you to know this topic. I want you to be involved in it," and because she really cares passionately about it. And so we really ask you to join. I'm making the ask, just like you do when you make your ask of your potential clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point there. I don't see any further questions. We're right about an hour, John, so I think we did really well on time. Obviously, a lot of great information there. It's just great to get a peek behind the scene, behind the curtain, as they say, to how things are sort of done. There on Capitol Hill, and how quickly things can get impacted. For everybody on the call today, this was recorded. A recording will go out. I'll make sure I get out the registration link. We'd be glad to go over how to get signed up and how to participate more in your state NAHU, as well as federally. John has also offered to give a copy of the presentation, so you want to check out the slides there, which is great. We can make those available. We don't know what's going to go on, 100% with Medicare, .gov this year, but as many of you know who work with us, our Connect for Medicare will do all the comparisons for you. We'll do enrollments, new for this year, text enrollments, which I think is going to be huge. As John had mentioned, a lot less seeing people in person this year. So the electronic, telephonic, and now text features is going to be really almost a requirement to do business here, especially for this upcoming AEP. So, John, I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add before we break for today.
No, I just really appreciate your support, and it's a great group. I wish I were there in person, but next time.
Yeah, absolutely. We plan on next year. We'll do a lot more in-person stuff. Looking forward to it there. But again, thank you, John. Everybody on the call, we appreciate it. Any questions, please reach out to Pinnacle Financial, and we'd be glad to assist you with all of your business needs there. So I'm going to end it there, John. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you.